is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
Hey Hoopheads, wanted to take a minute to shout out our partners and friends at Dr. Dish Basketball. We've had their partnership manager and training specialist Jefferson Mason and marketing manager Nick Bartlett on the show in the past, and we couldn't be more excited about what they're doing for the game of basketball. Their Dr. Dish shooting machines are undoubtedly the most advanced and user-friendly machines on the market and truly accelerate skill development faster than ever. Beyond efficient reps, Dr. Dish provides training expertise and versatility designed to develop complete players. The new Dr. Dish CT machine has further revolutionized basketball training with over 150 plus on-demand individual and team workouts from some of the best coaches and trainers in the game. These workouts include video instruction and combine game-like shooting drills with ball handling, conditioning, and agility drills. Along with workouts, the Dr. Dish training management system also provides stat tracking and analytics to track progress and ensure accountability. These are just a few reasons why top programs like Duke, North Carolina, Louisville, Florida, Baylor, and countless others are upgrading to Dr. Dish. Learn more at drdishbasketball.com. Follow their incredible content at Dr. Dish B-Ball on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And make sure you mention the Hoopheads podcast to get $300 off your next Dr. Dish purchase. That's a great deal, Hoopheads. Get out and get your Dr. Dish shooting machine today.
Perseverance, resiliency, grit, determination, goal setting, teamwork, all those things that we know make people successful later on in their lives. And so we really try to provide a lot of tools, resources, training for coaches, for athletic administrators, for parents, and for the athletes themselves to really hone in on creating better athletes as well as better people.
Ryan Virtue is the Partnership and Development Manager for the Positive Coaching Alliance in Cleveland, Ohio. Positive Coaching Alliance is a national organization dedicated to improving the youth sports experience for players, coaches, and parents. PCA's mission is simple: better athletes, better people. Ryan is a former collegiate athlete and has coached at both the collegiate and youth levels. A native of Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, he was a standout athlete at South Carleton High School in baseball and volleyball, and he went on to play baseball at Niagara University, where he received a Bachelor of Science in Sports Management. Since graduating from college, Ryan has dedicated his career to providing positive experiences to young athletes. We need your help to spread the word about the Hoopheads Pod. What can you do? First, after you're done listening to this episode with Ryan Virtue, let a friend or coaching colleague know about the show so we can continue to grow the great game of basketball. Second, please leave us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. And third, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. The Hoopheads Pod can be found on all the major podcast apps. Get your coaching hard drive ready so you can add some notes as you listen to this episode with Ryan Virtue from the Positive Coaching Alliance. Hello and welcome to the Hoopheads Podcast. It's Mike Klinzing here with my co-host Jason Sunkel. And tonight we are pleased to welcome from the Positive Coaching Alliance, the Senior Partnership and Development Manager here in Cleveland, Ryan Virtue. Ryan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Mike. Appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. You and I have had the opportunity to get to know each other over the last year or so through the Positive Coaching Alliance and both of our connections therein and our belief in the mission of trying to improve youth sports and make not just better athletes, but better people. I wanted to start out here, Ryan, by giving you a chance for those people who are in our audience who maybe aren't as familiar with the Positive Coaching Alliance as you and I are. Just give us a little background on the history of PCA, how it got started, what its mission is, and a little bit about what your role is in PCA today.
Fantastic. Well, PCA is a 21-year-old nonprofit organization, and actually I tend to shy away from the term organization because it's really a movement. And you use the terms perfectly that really sum up our mission as better athletes, better people. And really what we do is we look at the youth sports space, the high school space, really the amateur space, and look at it for what it should be, which is a character development opportunity. There's about 40 million kids that play youth sports nationwide. And of those kids, when they get into the high school level, There's only about 6% on average of all high school kids that have an opportunity to go on and play collegiate. And so, there's a lot of coaches, a lot of programs, a lot of parents that get so tunnel vision focused on having their kid become that 6% that they really forget about the 94%, and the development of their characteristics and their life lessons, whether it's perseverance, resiliency, grit, determination, goal setting, teamwork, all those things that we know make people successful later on in their lives. And so we really try to provide a lot of tools, resources, training for coaches, for athletic administrators, for parents, and for the athletes themselves to really hone in on creating better athletes as well as better people.
So as we go through and continue the conversation, we'll dive into some of those things that Ryan just talked about a little bit deeper. Before we move forward with that, though, let's talk a little bit, Ryan, about how you got to where you are with PCA today, and just so people have an understanding of your athletic background a little bit, the perspective that you bring. So let's go back to the time when you were a kid and talk about your early exposure to athletics and what your experiences were like with athletics when you were a kid.
Absolutely. So first of all, I will say I am Canadian, and I'm a horrendous Canadian. And I mean that in the sense that I did not play ice hockey growing up. And it's funny, I know you guys had Dave Love on, who's a shooting coach in the NBA. I've known Dave for a little while. We actually crossed paths when I used to work at the University of Calgary, where he coached. And he had a similar story. He's kind of a non-Canadian in a way, in the sense that he didn't play hockey or quit at a certain point.
We're going to have to get Wayne Gretzky to come on to balance out you two strange Canadians. So,
yeah, seriously, no doubt. But no, so baseball was actually my sport, and my second love was really the sport of volleyball. So I was kind of a two-sport athlete. Volleyball was actually my favorite sport to play. I just happened to be better at baseball, and there was more opportunity for me in baseball. And so my ticket into the country here in the United States was being a baseball student athlete in college. And so, had some great coaches, great mentors growing up that really helped me. Were a little unique in the sense that high school baseball really wasn't a thing. It was my senior year, what you guys would call almost a super senior, because I was the last year of grade 13 in the province of Ontario. But we started a baseball program for our high school that year. And so it was a little bit of a different experience, but it ultimately got me to where I wanted to be, which was having the opportunity to play collegiately and get a great degree. So I went on to Niagara University. Played all 4 years in Niagara University, and while I was there, really fell in love with the student-athlete experience, and so decided to start pursuing an opportunity working in collegiate athletics administration. I was a sport management major. Went down that path for a while. I ended up interning within the athletics department there as a student-athlete, so my whole life was Niagara Athletics for about 3 years once I started interning. And then it's funny, my wife, believe it or not, is from the Cleveland area. So American girl who played ice hockey in college. So go figure that one.
You got your hockey one way or the other.
Yeah, so we're a very backwards relationship. But yeah, we met. She's from this area. I had an opportunity to take an internship with the Collegiate Athletic Directors Association, based out of Westlake, actually, and very professional development focused organization for collegiate athletic administrators. Interned there for a year, joked that I got deported because I ran out of my student visa, and so I ended up actually moving to Canada. I got the job at the University of Calgary. I was basically the lone marketing guy for all of their athletics department. That's where I got to meet Dave, where I really got to develop a more full-time skill set from an administrative standpoint. And I was also the pitching coach for the club baseball program there while working with a bunch of youth organizations on the coaching side. And then I ended up marrying my wife, had a chance to move back here. I really came back blind, trying to figure out what I wanted to do, knowing geographically, when you limit yourself in sports, you're kind of handcuffed a little bit in terms of opportunities. There just aren't that many. Worked in the nonprofit space for the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation for a bit, and then had an opportunity to go back to that Collegiate Directors Athletics Association, and was there for about 7 years before making the jump, really a passion move to PCA. So that was about a year and a half ago now.
And so just so people have an understanding of what you do on a day-to-day basis, just give people an idea of what your role is within PCA, and then we're going to jump into some of the PCA principles and some of the things and challenges that we see out there in youth sports and some of the great things that are going on in youth sports as well, and how PCA is trying to impact and make a difference in the lives of kids and coaches.
Absolutely. So basically, my whole role and responsibility is A through Z for our entire chapter here. So I manage our board of directors. We're really fortunate that we have just an incredible group of individuals who are in the sports space, who are in the corporate space, that have been former athletes, that are current coaches, that are parents, that really believe in something bigger than themselves. So I get to work with that great, incredible group of individuals to really drive our mission forward. I work with our partners, our corporate partners. So we're partnered with the Cleveland Cavaliers now. Announced that partnership this week, which was fantastic. Working with the Cleveland Indians, Fox Sports Ohio, and University Hospitals, and really always trying to grow that reach so that we can have more impact within our community. But then my real primary focus is growing our partnerships. And what I mean by partners is youth sports organizations and high schools that really live and breathe the communities we're trying to serve, which are the kids, their parents, the coaches, and the administrators themselves. And so I have a tremendous opportunity to have an incredible number of conversations with just great leaders, like-minded individuals that are not so like-minded at all. And I get to challenge some of their thought processes, but really it all comes back to character development and how do we work with these organizations to create the best possible experience for the kids within their programs.
So not only are you having an administrative role there, but obviously you are also the boots on the ground guy who is going out and having these conversations with high school coaches, high school athletic directors, people who are in charge of private, whether it's baseball or basketball or football or whatever it might be, whatever sport, organizations, to have them come on board and get them to have an understanding of PCA's mission and what they're trying to do. And not only that, but you're also a dad and you're also a coach. And so you and I have had a couple of different conversations about our own experiences as sports parents, as youth sports coaches, that I think will be relevant here as we get into our discussion. So let's start out with one of the main talking points that you and I discussed before we jumped on, and that is the need for everyone in the youth sports space to begin to look in the mirror in terms of what they themselves can do to try to improve the landscape of youth sports and to try to make the culture of youth sports a more positive one. So talk a little bit about that from the PCA perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah, Mike, I think as I continue to grow and learn in this position and continue to have more conversations, one of the questions I really like to ask is, hey, what are some of the biggest challenges that you're facing specifically within your organization? Then also, what are some of the biggest challenges that you think the industry is facing? And one thing that commonly comes up is, if I'm talking to a parent, it's, an issue with the quality of coaches. If I'm talking to a coach, it's the parent issue. If I'm talking to officials, it's a little bit of everything in terms of the negativity that exists within the climate and the acceptance of inappropriate behavior. And there's just a lot of finger pointing. And it doesn't matter whether you're, a parent, whether you're a coach, whether you're an administrator, whether you're an athlete yourself, there's always something, when you're facing adversity, there's always something that we can do. I mean, anytime you point your finger at somebody, there's three fingers pointing right back at you. And I really think if we're going to change this culture within the youth sports climate, the high school climate, we need to stop pointing fingers at each other. I think that's by far, if I was to pick one issue that I feel is the biggest issue we face in sports, it's not parental behavior. It's not a lack of quality coaching. It's not kids are different and they just aren't accepting of being coached or being challenged. It's really everybody is quick to blame other people and aren't willing to step up and make better decisions in the best interest of the kids in general.
All right, so let's go with each of those three stakeholders that you just talked about, and let's give one thought, suggestion, idea for if I'm a coach, if I'm an official, if I'm a parent, and I look in the mirror, what's one thing for each of those groups that you would like to see be implemented on a more consistent basis from coaches, officials, and parents? If you could point to one thing for each of those groups that they might be able to change when they look in the mirror. Absolutely.
That's a great question. I would start with leadership. I think there's a lot of conversations that I have, and let me start off by saying we have incredible people that are trying to lead these organizations, especially when you get into the youth level. It's a volunteer role. And the fact that these individuals are willing to step up, put themselves out there, that's an incredibly positive thing. But what we need to do, I think, is provide a lot more guidance for them. And when I talk about leadership and what they can do, first things first, if you don't understand your missions or your organization's mission, that is number one. Because I can't tell you how many organization leaders I talk to or boards that I'll talk to, and I'll ask the mission and I'll know the mission because they've clearly stated on their website, but they have no idea how to articulate it. And that to me is the biggest problem, because if you can't clearly articulate your mission as an organization, as the organizational leader, how are you supposed to lead any of these other constituent groups, whether it's coaches or parents or the kids themselves? And so I think the first big thing as leaders is make sure you fully understand your organization's mission and the purpose for it. If it hasn't been stated because it's a relatively new mission, state it. It's really important that you first have that general awareness. And then the second part is educate around it. We can't just assume that people know what our mission as an organization is. And we can't just assume that putting it on our website is going to allow them to understand it. Especially within the youth sports and high school climate, you have new people entering your environment every single year, right? There's new kids, there's new coaches, there's new families. So it has to be a continual education around, this is our mission. When you sign up to join our program, this is what you can expect. And so I think that's the biggest thing from an administrator standpoint, that they can look in the mirror and tighten up a little bit.
I like that. I think it's important on a lot of levels. I think, as you stated, it's important for the leadership to understand, because if you don't understand your mission, then what's driving your decisions? And you have to be, when you're looking at a decision, you should be looking at it through the framework of, does this advance our mission or does it not? And if you have no idea what your mission is, then you're going to be just flailing around in the dark. And that's not a place where any organization wants to be. And then conversely, when I think about it from a coaching standpoint and from a parent standpoint, if I'm considering joining an organization as a parent, and in my role as a parent, I might also be joining that organization as a volunteer coach, for example. If I don't understand what that organization's mission is all about, then what I may want to get out of youth sports may be completely different from what the organization wants to get out of youth sports. And then I think when you have that mismatch of ideas and thoughts, that's when you have the opportunity for conflict, which then has a negative impact on everybody who's involved in the conflict, but also everybody who's tangentially involved in it as part of the organization. So I think when you can align your mission with the type of people that you're trying to attract to your organization, that tends to create a positive experience for everybody that's involved. It's when you have that disconnect between the two that I think you run into problems. So that would be the number one thing that I would piggyback off what you said, is when everybody who is part of the organization is aligned. And by part of the organization, I mean not just the leadership and the people who, quote, own the organization, but also the people who are coming in to join that organization. When you can get those two groups on the same page, you eliminate a lot of potential issues right from the very beginning with that clear communication.
No, I think that's spot on. And you kind of hit on it a couple different times. There's really, when there's no mission, there's two main problems. A, you have nothing to educate people on. So like you said, they create their own perception of what this environment is, right? And a lot of the people, just human nature, a lot of our own perception is based on what we've experienced, right? And what we've experienced in a lot of our cases as kind of, middle-aged, some older folks that are now giving back, that are parents that are really trying to help support these organizations and our kids. There were a lot of coaching techniques that we were exposed to that research has proven they're not as effective, right? I'm not saying they're ineffective, right? Because there are some coaches that can have success with that old school, beat my chest, win at all costs type mentality, but research proves that there's significant more success when you're able to motivate somebody intrinsically as opposed to that external motivation. And so, when you have those people who are A, unaware of the mission, and B, they're undereducated on the importance of supporting that mission, then we run into those challenges. The other thing that we run into with leaders is if nobody is aware of the mission and nobody is aware of the thought processes and the decision making that takes place, it becomes a personal decision, like you referenced. And anytime something is perceived as a personal decision, then anytime there's a disagreement, it's going to be a personal disagreement. And that's where you see a lot of organizational leaders run into burnout stages, because they feel like they're catching it from left, right, and center based on decisions that they're making. And a lot of it is we just need to realign those thought processes and those decision-making processes towards a mission versus towards a person's opinion, basically.
So let's take this one step further and start thinking about what, in your mind, does a quality mission statement look like for a youth sports organization? And let's, just to kind of narrow it down, maybe let's start out with a youth sports organization, talking about a group that's for elementary school kids, and then maybe flip it around and talk about what the mission might be for a high school athletic department. Just in your mind, your experience, people that have had success and have implemented the types of programming and things that we're talking about here. What are some, sample keywords, concepts that you think should be a part of a sports organization's mission statement?
Yeah, that's a great question. And to really simplify it and oversimplify it in a way, at any way, shape, or form you word a mission statement, for most organization, it's going to come up to what PCA's simplified mission is, which is better athletes, better people, right? You start talking about, I'll use basketball, for example, right? A lot of those missions are, we want to strive to create better athletes through the sport of basketball, as well as amplify the importance of sportsmanship and good character development, right? That's a very loose worded mission. But at the end of the day, it's longer words, but it comes back to, we want to create better basketball players or better athletes, right? And we want to make sure that they have a positive experience that makes them better people when they leave. So I think the more we're able to simplify and get to the point, there's obviously a lot more that can go into the goals to achieve that mission. But mission, and I think it's the same whether it's a early childhood organization. I think the mission's the same. Obviously, there's a different level of competition, that plays in, but it's ultimately still we want to develop them through sports. When you get into high school, it's really the same. It's just their next step, instead of being middle school or high school, their next step is college. And that next step in college doesn't necessarily mean athletics in college. It means we need to prepare them for their educational experience, for this life experience that they're about to have. It's their first time away from their own home. So there's a lot of things that we can really teach and amplify through athletics. So I think the mission really is the same across all youth sports organizations in high schools. It's just the step in which it plateaus is different at each level.
Okay, so here's a question that I often hear. I often think about it myself in terms of my own basketball organization and other organizations that I've come in contact with or had the opportunity to work with. And that is when you have parents out there who see a one-loss record, or they see a reputation, or they see something that they want to chase after that is not focused on the things that we just talked about. It's not worried about making better athletes or better people. It's worried about, as you described earlier, the win at all costs. The one-loss record is what's important. And I'm not that concerned with whether or not my kid is learning life lessons. I want to know, are they going to be 10-0 in this fourth grade basketball season? And so for me, that's always a challenge when I look at the landscape of youth sports, is how do we go about educating parents and helping them to see and understand the long odds that we all know and that you described earlier, in terms of kids who are going to end up getting a scholarship to play a sport in college, or even going beyond that, kids who are going to eventually earn some type of paycheck for playing professional sports. We know those odds are astronomical, and yet we see so many parents that are chasing that dream rather than chasing the dream that we're talking about, which is using athletics as a vehicle to, yes, improve as an athlete, but more importantly, to improve as a person, so that when the sports experience is done, they're a better person for having taken part in that. So how do we go about, in your mind, how do we go about educating and getting that word out to people? What are some things that PCA is doing to help parents to, again, look in the mirror and understand, what can I do to better improve the youth landscape for my own child and just the landscape in general?
Yeah, I think, again, great question. I think, first of all, when we deal with parents, we need to understand there's nobody more passionate about their kids than their parents. Sometimes that passion is very misdirected. And so that's where I think that educational piece really comes in, whether it's providing, resources, having conversations. And a lot of times, Mike, where you get into the middle school age and the high school age, and this is obviously a long-term plan and not a quick fix. But that's why it's really important that we start that education process early within these parks and rec programs and these pure recreational programs, because by the time they get into especially the high school level, a lot of those perceptions and behaviors have become habit, right? And it's really difficult to try to break habit.
Absolutely.
And so I think it's really important that, within each and every program that you work within or coach within, try to identify where are a lot of those kids coming from. Is there another organization that they're coming from? And is there a way, in a way, is it a feeder system, not obviously always affiliated, but how can we help support the education of the next class that's coming into our group? So I think that's one thing. The other thing is, we talk about that passion. I think parents right now, a lot of the guidance that they're given is basically, here's a code of conduct, sign it, and then stay out of our business as coaches. And I think there's two things wrong with that. One, again, nobody's more passionate about their kids than the parent. So when you tell a parent that they shouldn't be involved, in my opinion, when they start lashing out or they start misbehaving, or they start riding their kid a little bit more because they want that win, it's them trying to gain sense of a control that they're told they have no control over. And again, it's misguided. So that's definitely one aspect of it. Well, the second thing I would really say about that whole approach with the code of conduct and stay out of it is the code of conduct itself. The code of conduct is really a list of things not to do. There's not a ton of direction on what to do. And so what I really think is important is we encourage parents to be involved, but again, clearly define what their role is. It's not in the X's and O's. It's in more the motivational support. It's more in some of the psychological support and life lesson opportunities that are developed through sports. And it really should be a partnership in that angle as opposed to a partnership as it relates to the physical development of the kids. And so there are a lot of tips and tools that we have within the PCA website. We have an online resource center called the PCA Development Zone that just has a ton of incredible tools and tips and videos from our National Advisory Board members, blog posts. So certainly encourage coaches to check that out and be able to help provide some additional guidance. But, it really comes down to relationships. If there's no relationship from coach to parent, then it's really tough to try to have those types of conversations about playing time, and everything then tends to become more about those sides of things that you really don't want parents to have any say or control over.
As you've listened to the Hoopheads podcast, one common topic that continually comes up in our conversations is character. I'm fortunate to be associated with the Positive Coaching Alliance, a national nonprofit movement that provides valuable tools, training, and resources for coaches, athletes, parents, and administrators that is centered around sports and educational psychology and organizational behavior research. PCA combines this research with practical advice from a national advisory board of top pro and college athletes and coaches who utilize PCA principles at the highest levels of competition. Through a partnership with our local Cleveland chapter of the PCA, we are pleased to offer a discount code to allow you, our listeners, to take a PCA online course for just $20. To take advantage of this offer, visit the store on positivecoach.org and enter the discount code HoopHeads20. That's HoopHeads20 with 2 capital H's. Coaches, I hope you'll take advantage of this great offer from the Positive Coaching Alliance and help us continue to grow the game. Yeah, so what I find in that case, and I think this is true in my day job as a teacher too, is when you can be, as a coach, I'm speaking, and probably it goes the other way too for a parent, but if you are proactive in your communication rather than reactive in your communication, I've found in my own career, my own experiences, that things tend to go a lot better when something does go wrong or there is a question between a coach and a parent. If there's already a relationship and communication that has been established, it's much easier if you've talked to a parent 3, 4, 5 times about something positive and then something negative has to be discussed, or there's a question about something that the two parties disagree with. If you already have a relationship developed, it becomes much easier to have those tough conversations later on. Whereas if the first time a coach and a parent ever connect is when, a kid didn't play in a game, or the kid got benched after something, or the parent disagrees with the strategy and suddenly is calling the coach up on the phone to yell at them, that's when you can really have issues, when you haven't proactively established that communication like you're talking about.
Yeah, that's really spot on, Mike. I think the proactiveness, and that's really anything in life, right? And a lot of that stems from clearly understanding your purpose, right? If a coach doesn't really understand and they're just kind of going through and coaching the X's and O's, and they're developing skill sets, and that's as far as they take their coaching, and they have this mindset of that's my only job, which again comes back to leadership and driving home the true importance of their role as a coach. It really comes from that self-awareness and being able to understand and articulate that to other people, whether again it's parents or coaches or the administration that are overseeing them.
So one of the things that I've read about and sort of as I've been in this youth sports world thought about is there always seems to be some resistance, especially when we're talking about volunteer coaches, which in the case of, if you think about Parks and Rec, like you mentioned, more often than not, those programs across all sports are being staffed primarily by volunteer coaches. And one of the things that you always hear in terms of resistance is, well, we're already asking these people to volunteer and give up their time. And so to ask them to come in and take part in, for example, a PCA workshop and be given some tools on how to become a better coach to make the experience better for their athletes, it doesn't seem fair for us to ask people to volunteer and give their time. And now, in order for them to volunteer, we're also going to ask them to come in and get this educational course that's going to help make them better. People just don't want to do that. Can you kind of refute that statement and explain why providing that education actually is going to help a program's ability to retain their coaches?
Yeah, I never run into that, Mike, at all in my conversations. No, I run into that a lot. It's very, very frequent. And I think, it comes back to what is your mission and how much of an emphasis are you placing on your mission and how much is this needed? If it is really needed as a leader and you've had issues with coaches and you've had retention issues with athletes or retention issues with coaches, it really is an issue, and it really should be treated as such, and it should be emphasized. The other thing that I would say is, we get looped into all the time, hey, we already have them make sure they're CPR certified. We already have them take Lindsay's Law. We already have them go through, the concussion side of things. And, those are vitally important. Those are potentially life and death situations, which heaven forbid you come across a situation as a coach that you're underprepared for and something harmful happens to a child. So those are very important. There's specific reasons why those are in place. Our programming from PCA's perspective is really more intended to help them do their job as a coach at a higher level. It's intended to provide more tools and resources for them to be successful in developing these kids. And so it really is a positive thing. And I think what's even better about it, in my opinion, is, we talk about, the importance of, effort and learning and understanding that making mistakes are okay. Those things transition to all aspects of life. So even though it's a volunteer coaching position, we talk about it in the sports setting. The lessons that are learned through the PCA program and the PCA workshops directly to translate literally every aspect of life. It's helped me immensely in my full-time job, obviously with PCA, but not coaching. Obviously more on the administration side. It's helped me with my family and my different situations that I run into with my wife and my kids and how I manage those relationships. And so it is really, really key information that make them successful. And I think what's always incredible to me is, everybody will arrive. There's a lot of people that arrive that are maybe a little skeptical, but by the time they leave, the conversation in the room is incredible. And you see a lot of head nodding going on in the room as conversation continues to occur, and they really see the value in it. The challenge is getting over that hump and more taking a positive, again, proactive approach of, listen, this is an investment we're making in your development because you are volunteering. We're not having you do it to volunteer.
Correct. And I think that it's very important for people to understand that from a coaching standpoint, from a volunteer coaching standpoint, if I provide a volunteer coach with more tools to be able to do the job better, that people are going to be more likely to come back and want to do it again because they've had a positive experience. And I think sometimes what someone like you or I, or someone who maybe is the head of a sports organization, and again, define that however you want, the chances are pretty high that we are sports people, that somebody who's in charge of a sports organization is a sports person. And that's not to say that all volunteer coaches are not, because obviously a lot of them are. But there are some who are not sports people. And there are some people who maybe played sports but haven't coached before. And so people come into it maybe a lot less confident than what we might think from the outside. And by giving them these tools, you're making them feel more confident going into the experience. And then because they have these tools, because they're more confident, they end up doing a better job, which makes them feel better about what they've done. And now they're much more likely to come back when they're asked again to coach the following year. They're much more likely to come back. And I think that when you just throw someone off the deep end and say, hey, go ahead and swim, yeah, somebody's going to get to shore, but there's going to be a lot more of those coaches who are going to drown and not come back. And now we've lost, somebody who could have been a positive influence in a child's life. And I think that's where the education piece really pays off.
Absolutely. Well, and I think too, Mike, there's this stigma that, especially early on, I had to have played in order to be a good coach. And it's funny, we run our Breakfast with the Indians event every summer towards the end of their season. We had their player development staff this year during the Breakfast with the Indians. And Luke Carlin, who is the manager of the Lake County Captains this season, said it perfectly. There's this perception, especially with these coaches who are probably the ones you have the most issues with within your organizations, or maybe a little more hot-headed, that are a little more my way or the highway. I've got this. I know what I'm doing. I played D1 ball or whatever it may be. We really look at it. It's like, hey, that's great, but I completed 7th grade. Would that make me a great 7th grade teacher? And the answer is no. There's a significant difference between knowing the game and knowing how to teach the game. And that teaching the game, you can know the game and you can teach the fundamentals of the game, and you can teach the X's and O's and the skill development side of things pretty easily. But, as you know, Mike, in your playing and coaching experience, if you can't teach and if you can't meet these kids both in their mind and in their heart, as well as with the physical aspect in their development, you're missing out on some significant pieces in their personal and professional development, and you really run into limitations in terms of their growth as an athlete.
And I think to go along with that, Ryan, I think what another piece of resistance that you'll oftentimes hear is, okay, yeah, that's all great. Sure, we're teaching them life lessons and we're doing this, and I'm going to learn how to be a better coach. But ultimately, for me, it's the X's and O's that's going to win games. And I have this out of bounds play, or I know how to teach this fundamental skill and whatever. And I want to win, and all this PCA stuff is, I don't want to hear about that, because I'm just interested in winning. And I think what people lose sight of is that all the things that we're talking about, yes, they have an impact on a kid's life beyond the court or beyond the field, but they also have a positive impact on winning and losing. And so we want to focus on the process, and we want to make sure that kids are getting that positive experience. But in the course of providing them with that, we're actually improving our chances of having the desired outcome. Now, as we know, no outcome is assured, no outcome is guaranteed, but the reality is we're having a positive impact on kids' lives, and we're also increasing our odds of having an outcome, because we're focused on the process, the outcomes that we want naturally occur more often because we're coming at this from such a positive direction.
That's 100% accurate, Mike. The more you're able to, and again, it comes down to, within athletes, the elite athletes are highly motivated individuals intrinsically, right? There's, that 6% that go on to play collegiate, and then the 2% that have a chance to play professionally, post collegiate. They're really special players, but the vast majority of them, the ones that are the most successful, are the ones that are motivated intrinsically. And so a lot of these coaches that tend to focus on pure skill development and just the X's and O's, they really aren't creating intrinsic motivation. They're really creating extrinsic motivation, where maybe this player is reacting positively because I challenged him, right? But we need to really create that intrinsic motivation within these kids so that they're motivated at a higher level on their own to really develop a higher level of success. And the other side of it too is, the more you're able to take that approach, the more you see these kids start to be creative. They're not fearful of making mistakes. They go, you see a lot of really talented players that will push themselves to the point of where they're fearful of creating a turnover, right? And they pull up instead of driving to the basket, or they make a hesitation move instead of an aggressive one that you'd like to see. And a lot of it is because of that, that fear of what the coach is going to say when I turn this ball over. And we really need to create this environment where we're encouraging failure and supporting it. Not just saying, hey, yeah, good job, and being truthful and specific in the type of feedback that we give, but we really need to put it and educate these kids on how to better themselves just as much as we're trying to better them as coaches.
All right, so I have two things that I want to share here. One is a story that's related to that making mistakes idea that you just talked about. And I'll go back to, my son is currently in 8th grade, and I started coaching him on a travel basketball team when him and his friends were in 3rd grade. And myself and a couple of the other fathers who helped me to coach, we made a decision at the very beginning of that 3rd grade year that we wanted our kids to be able to shoot left-handed layups, and we wanted them to use their left hand on the left side. And so we made a very, very conscious effort to reward the effort as opposed to the result of the shot. And so every time a kid in practice would drive to their left and shoot a shot with the left hand, didn't matter whether it went in, didn't matter whether they made it, they missed it, whatever, there was praise from everyone who was part of the coaching staff on that particular day. Hey, great job. Keep shooting that with your left hand. Doesn't matter if it went in. Great job. We want you to keep doing that. And so we would do that in practice. We would do it in games, which for coaches is a lot harder when you're asking a kid to do something that may result in a shot that they're going to miss, whereas if they shot it with their right hand, they might have been able to make it. But if you're going to get kids eventually to be able to do that, you have to continue to encourage them to, as you said, make those mistakes. And so what we found is, over the course of the next year, 2 years, 3 years, depending on the kid and their skill level, eventually we got to the point where all those kids on that team could shoot a left-handed layup. And if we had approached that in a different way and just focused on whether or not the shot was going in, sure, those kids might have made more shots in 3rd grade shooting the ball with their right hand, but ultimately would they have been a better basketball player for having done that by the time they were in 5th or 6th grade? And the answer to that is no. And so I think that's something where, if you're a coach and you become aware of just how you're treating mistakes and what you're looking at and focusing on the effort rather than the result of the play, I think you're going to be a lot better off. Another example of that would be if, let's say you're on a fast break and a player's running the lane, they're sprinting as fast as they can, and they out sprint their opponent down the floor, they get a pass, they catch it, they take the layup, and they miss it. Now, I could focus on two things. I could focus on the fact that that kid outran their defender, got to the place where I want him to be, caught the ball. All great stuff. The layup doesn't go in. That's the outcome. We didn't score 2 points. So the result might have been the same if the kid walked up the floor and never got into that position. So I can choose as the coach to say, hey, great job sprinting the lanes, getting to the spot, caught the ball, layup didn't go in. Hey, it's all right. Do that same thing again next time because we're much more likely to get a good result. Or I could focus on, can't believe you missed that layup. So now the next time, is that kid going to be motivated? To your point, are they going to be motivated to run the floor hard if they know that the outcome that's produced doesn't make my coach happy? It's just, you're much better off if you can praise that effort as opposed to the result of the play.
Absolutely, Mike. And I think it's, the more you're able to recognize that behavior, that positive behavior, the more you're going to get it, right? There's a lot of times where, with kids especially, we see them do it. We praise them when they did it, right, the first time. And then from then on, it just becomes expectation, right? And we don't continue to praise that effort. I think it's really important that when you see something positive, you mark it and say something positive about it. And the other side of it too, is really from a mental standpoint. So going back to kind of where we initially started this conversation about, what is one thing that each of these constituent groups can really focus on. The one thing that we need to understand from a coach's perspective is the environment that these kids are being brought up in is night and day different than when we were kids, right? And so we've got to really be able to meet and adapt to them. Mike, I don't know how many times you hear it, but I hear it all the time where, these kids are just different these days, right? And I think for coaches, in my honest opinion, I think that's an excuse, right? It's basically saying, these kids can't adapt to me and my coaching style, right? And it's really, at the end of the day, our job as coaches is to develop the athlete, right? It's not to make the athlete our version of the athlete that they should be. And I think the more we're able to learn from them and adapt to them and understand that, we use the term the emotional tank, right? We look at the mind like it's an emotional gas tank. When somebody, when your gas tank is empty, you're not going anywhere, right? Those are the kids that are uncoachable, that are unmotivated, that don't want to be at practice, right? And there's a lot of things that can play into that. And a lot of those things are the external environment, right? It could be home life. It could be, they're being bullied within the classroom. It could be now more than ever being bullied, via social media, or there could be any number of things that impact these kids and their mindset before they even get to the court, or the field of play or whatever it may be, depending on the sport. But, we need to, as coaches, understand, hey, we can't expect these kids to show up and all of a sudden, you hear it all the time, hey, once you cross the lines, you're in my zone, right? You're in basketball mode, right? The reality is our mind doesn't work that way. Our mind can't just shut off what's been happening outside. And frankly, everything that's happening outside is far more important in the grand scheme of life than what's happening on the court. And so we really need to understand when these kids come to us, they're at a completely different state. And the same kid is going to be at a completely different state in their emotional tank every single time they arrive, right? Pre-game, pre-practice, whatever it may be. And so the more we're able to find opportunities, to create more positivity within the initial onset of our interaction with them, the more positive response you're going to get from the kids. And again, that's very process driven. And obviously the more positive, reactions you get from the kids, the more positive results you're going to be receiving.
The Head Start Basketball Holiday Camp for boys and girls in grades 1 through 6 will be held on December 26th and 27th. Join us for 2 fun days of basketball fundamentals, contests, and small-sided games. You can find more information or get registered at headstartbasketball.com. I think as a coach, it's important to remember that you're coaching people and you're not coaching a sport. You're coaching people, and people bring with them emotions. People bring with them emotions. People bring with them varied backgrounds. And it's your job as a coach to figure out and build a relationship with each of your players, to figure out how to best serve them, to get the most out of them as an athlete, and serve them as best you can to help them improve as a human being as well. And I think one of the things that I've found to be helpful to me in my own journey as a coach is the word that I always come back to is intentional. And I think it's really important as a coach that you go into a practice, you go into a game, you go into a season being intentional about what you're trying to accomplish, not necessarily from a sport skill development standpoint, but from a life lessons, character development standpoint, and what your team, your program, again, depending upon what level you're coaching, what that's going to be all about, and making sure that you stick by those things each and every day in your interactions with your team. And I think sometimes it's easy as a coach to get caught up in the day-to-day of, oh, we've got to do this, or we need to get this in, or we have to make sure that we do this. And, it's easy to push off those character lessons or those, things that you might want to spend a little bit extra time on, but it's going to take away from how much time you have to practice your offense or your defense. And if you're not intentional when you go in there, it's easy to lose sight of that. And I'll just share another example from my own story here. With all of my kids when they were younger, what I did was, especially in the first year or two that we played, I put together a little notebook, and some of the things were actually used from the PCA Talking Points email series, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Ryan. And people out there, if you haven't subscribed to that or gotten those emails sent to you, Talking Points is a great way to be able to communicate with your team some of the life lessons that Ryan and I are talking about here today. But so I put together these notebooks, and we would go and we would have a 15 or 20 minute lesson before we would actually get on the floor and start practicing our basketball. And I have to admit that even for me, who knows the value of all those things and has read and understood how important it is, there were still times where I'm like, 20 minutes to do this. I really got to make sure that we're prepared for that press break for this next tournament so that we don't get beat. And I obviously know all the research and understand that piece of it. And even for someone like me, it still sometimes can be a challenge to step back and say, I've got to think about what's really important here. And I will say that with my teams, the more you can do those activities that focus on life lessons, that focus on character, that focus on team building, that focus on building bonds between your players, those things pay off in an intangible way. But I also think that, as we talked about earlier, those things do pay off in a tangible way and eventually lead to more positive traditional outcomes than just ignoring that stuff altogether. When you have a team that's closer together, when you have a team that trusts one another, when you're developing better people, those people become better teammates. Those people become just better able to handle adversity and stress. They're more positive, and all that translates into better outcomes when you don't focus on those outcomes, if that all makes sense.
No, it makes complete sense. And I really truthfully believe that's 100% accurate. And while you were talking through there, one of the things that really jumped to me was, the reminder that they're a person first. And I think that's something, that especially in elite athletes, we forget, right? There's a lot of times where they're so much better than everybody else, and we recognize that talent, and we start trying to coach to that talent as opposed to coaching them one step better and making it a process-driven improvement plan. But that right there, Mike, is the reason why I left the collegiate athletics industry to join PCA is I was really looking at, the mental health of our student athletes, and seeing the trajectory that it was going and going in the wrong direction. And obviously the NCAA is doing a lot from a mental health space in terms of their research. But the big thing for me was, it's not like these kids are becoming collegiate student athletes, these elite kids that, are elite high school, elite youth athletes growing up. It's not like all of a sudden they get to college and they're having a mental breakdown. That mentality really starts in the high school and youth space. So we really need to be cognizant of it with these elite athletes while we're trying to train their bodies, because what's happening is their sense of self is so tied to what they do instead of who they are, right? I was Ryan, the baseball player in college, right? I wasn't Ryan, the human being that was also really good at baseball. And that's a huge thing. And so when there's a disruption to that within our athletes, whether it's a coach change, whether it's, and the fear that comes with that in terms of playing time and that side of things, whether it's an injury that could be career threatening, whether that's graduation, and no longer being able to play. If your sense of self is so tied to what you do, the transition to that next step post competition, post serious competition is a significant step to take. And so, we need to really help these kids understand that difference between, failing at something and being a failure. There's a very, very significant difference between those two. And so the more we're able to draw those parallels, the more we're able to help these kids, and especially these elite kids that we're trying to generate. When I referenced earlier that 6% statistic of generally high school kids that have a chance to play collegiately, that doesn't mean we shouldn't strive to be in that 6%. I want to be very clear that, as coaches, as parents, as athletes, we should always strive to be in that 6%. But that doesn't mean if we don't get there that we're a failure. And it's very important to delineate and make that, showcase that difference.
Yeah, I love what you said there, because I think, and this is something that my perspective on it has become much more clear as I've aged and as I've become a parent myself, and I've gone through the youth sports experience with my own kids. And so I try to juxtapose my own experience as an athlete who ended up playing Division I college basketball with my own kids who like sports and play sports, but don't have the same level of drive and desire to be great at the sport that I did. And rather they're focused on having, enjoying the sport, playing it. They want to get better, but they're not as driven as I was. And so I start looking at it from a parent perspective, a coach perspective, and a player perspective. And what I see as I look back in time at myself, and then I look at my own kids, is I see that as important as sports was to me as a kid, and just like you, I was certainly Mike the basketball player as opposed to Mike the person who plays basketball, both I think in my own mind and in the mind of a lot of people who saw me and interacted with me when I was a high school player or a college player. And I look back on that, and my basketball career ended when I was 22. Now, that doesn't mean I still didn't play and do things, but my competitive basketball career was over at age 22. So I'm going to turn 50 next year. So now I'm going on 28 years of having no longer been a competitive athlete, which is longer than obviously the time that I was. And I think what we sometimes lose track of as coaches and as parents is the fact that even if your kid does achieve that 6%, or holy cow, what if they do achieve that 2%? you still want that person to be a good person in addition to being a great athlete. And I think sometimes we forget that our athletic careers are very, very short and our lives are very, very long. And if we can use our sports experience, our sports career, whether we end up being a player who plays recreationally for our entire life, or whether we end up being someone who plays Division I college athletics, or we end up being someone who gets an opportunity to sign a professional contract, ultimately all of us in most cases are going to live a lot more of our life after our athletic career is over. And if we can use sports to give our kids the tools to be successful adults and people, then I think we've won. And I think that's important for everybody to remember. And I think sometimes we get so caught up, especially as parents and as coaches, we get so caught up in the moment and in achievement and in outcomes that we forget that even if we get the traditional outcomes that we want, there's still a long life ahead of us after those outcomes are over, where we want to be healthy, happy, well-adjusted adults. And you talked a little bit about some of the mental strain that high-level athletes go through. And I think that there's probably a lot of undiagnosed mental strain on even a kid who's a recreational sixth grade basketball player whose dad wants him to be really, really good. I think if we could study that kid's, mental health, we might be surprised with what we would find. So I guess the message that I'd want to get out there to people is just remember that no matter what the outcome is for your child in sports, that ultimately you want them to have become a better person for having participated in whatever athletic environment that they participated in.
Yeah, Mike, I think it's really important that we use sports and not let sports use us. I think that's the easiest way to sum that up. I mean, it is an enormous part of our lives when we're in it. But when you look at that continuum of your life, you referenced, playing collegiately. I mean, even the average pro career is 2 to 5 years. So by the time these kids are 25, 26 years old, even if they played at the highest possible level, they're done in terms of competition, and that being the biggest part of their life. So the more we're able to prepare them and allow them to utilize sports to create that success. Ernst & Young did a study on female C-suite executives, and I believe it was 92% of C-suite executives of Fortune 500 companies that are females were former athletes. That's not a coincidence, but that statistic really shows what sports value truly is, and it extends far beyond the time that they play competitively.
I think that it's just you and I, and I'm sure most of our audience here on the podcast, as athletes, as coaches, as the parents of athletes, we understand the value of sports. And I think it's just important for people in whatever role you play in the sports world, whether you're a leader of a sports organization, whether you're a coach, whether you're a parent, whether you're an athlete, whether you're an official, to keep in mind of what the ultimate goal is and what you're trying to achieve. And I used the word intentional before, and I think that when people go into it and you talk to them before they're in the heat of the moment, I think most people would logically, philosophically agree with our conversation. But sometimes we get lost in that moment and we get caught up in the competition. We get caught up in comparing ourselves, comparing our kids to other people. And that's when we get in trouble, when we start looking at what's our one-loss record look like compared to this team, and what's my kid look like compared to that kid. And, I just think about the basketball world where, you can go online and find rankings of kids who are 8 and 9 years old. And, you just start looking at that kind of stuff, and that unfortunately, there's some people out there that are misguided about what is important about sports. And I just think if we're intentional about what we do and we go into it as a stakeholder in youth sports with our eyes open and with an understanding of what our own personal mission is, that we're going to be able to find and align with people who have the same goals and the same ideals that we do. And I think that goes back to the very beginning of what we talked about, which is you as an organization, you as a parent, you as a coach should have a very clear vision, a very clear mission of what you're hoping to accomplish in your role within youth sports. And if you do that, you're going to be able to find and align yourself with other like-minded people. And I think sometimes where we get in trouble is people who feel the way that what we've been talking about tonight is the way that they'd want their kids to experience sports, sometimes feel like they're on an island because what gets publicized is the bad behavior of the parent or the coach who is yelling and screaming or using profanity or not doing some of the things that we talked about. Those are the people who tend to get attention. And then as a result, people feel like that is all that's out there. And I think the mission that I have for tonight, and I think you as well, is to tell people that there are tools that are out there that can help us to get where we want to go, and that there's also a lot more people than we think that are out there that want to have this be what youth sports look like. And we just got to continue to build that community. I think PCA is doing a tremendous job of that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mike. I think you're 100% accurate. I think really, in the grand scheme of things, the more boisterous and more aggressive individuals are probably a significant minority. They're just a louder minority. I think there's a lot of people like you, like Jason, that get it and understand the importance of sports. And I think there's a lot of people though that are on that bubble, right? There's a lot of people that will adapt to whoever they're closest to or whoever is speaking louder that day. And the more we're able to, as the coaches that understand, as the parents that understand, the more we're able to help, really extend, again, look in the mirror, more we're able to help continue to expose people to the appropriate behaviors and the appropriate way to support these kids, the better off we're going to be.
Agree 100%. So with that being said, why don't you go ahead and share some of the ways that people can interact with the Positive Coaching Alliance? Give us ways that, whether I'm a parent, a coach, a youth sports organization, just lay out the ways that people can come into contact with this PCA content, how they can find out more about it, how they can get involved. And when we do that, I think that we're going to be able to continue to grow that impact that we've been talking about tonight.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, we're a national organization. There's 18 chapters across the country. And so wherever you're listening to this podcast from, we have the ability to provide support for your program. Our bread and butter is live, interactive, in-person workshops. It's where we get like-minded people together that maybe, when I say like-minded, it doesn't mean they all think on the same wavelength. We oftentimes have rooms where we have kind of the old school mentality coach of, I need these kids to meet me where I'm at. And then we have the coaches that are more educators in mindset. And we have the ability to have more interactive dialogue and provide opportunities for them to hopefully meet in the middle somewhere, because there are different aspects that are positive about both. But we need to have those dialogues. So our bread and butter is our live workshops. For individuals that are listening that really want to be exposed to PCA, we do have our online courses available. And actually, through this relationship that we have with Mike here from our Cleveland chapter, there is that opportunity to take that online course for any Hoopheads podcast listeners. It's just Hoopheads 20 with 2 capital H's. So you can go to our website and take one of those coach courses using that discount code. The other side that we have is entirely free, and that's our PCA Development Zone site. It's just PCA Dev Zone, so PCADEVZONE.com. And that's really just a free resource site that I encourage everybody to go and check out, regardless of what position you're in, because there's a ton of incredible best practices, videos, blogs, worksheets, self-evaluation pieces that you can utilize to really see where you are in this frame of mind. So utilize that site every chance you get. It's just really, really valuable. And it's obviously information that's really good to share if you're an organizational or a leader. Proactively share that information and some of those links with your coaches, your fellow coaches, your parents, some of your athletes, and your leadership. So tons of different ways to be involved and exposed to our content at the end of the day. We're just here to serve. We want to help this industry get better. We want to help individuals, whether they are coaches or administrators, parents or kids. We want to help everybody individually continue to elevate, the level in which they think and how they continue to grow as human beings.
I couldn't have said it better myself, Ryan. I think that my affiliation with the Positive Coaching Alliance has made me a better coach. It's made me a better sports parent. It's made me think about the role that sports should play in our society, in my family. And I just think for anybody who's out there, if you want to have a positive impact on a kid's life, there's no better way to do it than through sports. I'm a huge believer in what sports can do. I wouldn't be here where I am sitting today if it wasn't for sports. And I think Positive Coaching Alliance has a tremendous amount of resources that you can go to that can help make you a better coach, a better parent, a better youth sports leader. And I would highly recommend taking a course. If you get an opportunity to go to a workshop, I've been fortunate enough not to do as many as I would have liked, but I did get certified as a trainer, and I've done a few workshops myself. They're tremendously valuable. On the Dev Zone, I've been fortunate enough to be able to have some of our content put up on the Dev Zone. There's 8 or 9 videos that if you search, you can find me talking about some things related to youth sports and youth basketball. And I think I even have a couple blog posts that are probably still floating around on there somewhere, Ryan. So it's great stuff. And if you're out there and you want to get involved and you want to make a difference, the Positive Coaching Alliance is just a tremendous organization that is doing great things for youth sports across all the landscape, for youth basketball. And I just think that if you have an opportunity to get involved in any way, shape, or form, you're going to be better for having interacted with PCA. So Ryan, I can't thank you enough for spending an hour and 15 minutes or so with us tonight. Hopefully we've been able to give people an idea of just some of the tools that are out there that PCA offers that can help them to improve their youth sports experience. And if there's anything else that we didn't touch on, why don't you go ahead and share one last final point, and then we'll come back and wrap up the episode.
I think the last thing that I just want to leave everybody with is an appreciation for what you do. I know it's something that a lot of coaches, a lot of administrators really don't hear a lot, and that's the words thank you. You really do make a significant impact. I mean, I look back at my coaches. I actually just went back. My youth coach was inducted into our club's Hall of Fame, and I made the 8-hour drive north of the border just to see his induction because he had that kind of impact on my life. And that's the opportunity you have as coaches. It's really a lifelong impact, and it really develops a legacy that you're going to leave behind one day. And hopefully the more people like us are able to pay it forward and continue to grow and invest in and motivate the next generation. If they're able to do the same, then we make some real impact on this world. And so thank you all for what you do. If you want to follow us on social media, highly encourage that as well. Positive Coach US is our Twitter and Facebook account. So lots of great information that's shared through that you can share through your personal and organizational social media accounts as well. We also have individual chapter social media accounts. So just use our content. if there's ways that we can help, by all means, reach out. My contact information will be available on the description with this podcast. So certainly reach out anytime. And I love having these conversations. Mike, always great to spend time with you and pick your brain. I think I learn just as much from every conversation as I hope to get across. And just appreciate all you do. And this podcast is incredible. So continue to do this and continue to improve other coaches that are out there.
Well, thank you for the kind words. It means a lot to hear that coming from you. And I feel the same whenever we talk. I feel like I come away having better for having had the conversation. As I said earlier, we can't thank you enough for, taking some time out of your schedule to jump on with us. And to everyone out there, thanks for listening, and we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks. Head Start Basketball's Player Development Academy offers Cleveland area players a unique opportunity to improve their basketball skills. Regardless of a player's age, skill level, or position, training with Head Start Basketball will elevate your game to the next level. Do you want to improve your ball handling, become a better shooter, or develop into a more skilled, confident player? Our Academy classes offer training that's designed to do just that. Our training sessions are innovative and will have you learning skills that are transferable to actual games. We have 4 different class skill levels for boys and girls, ages 4 and up. All Player Development Academy classes will be held at the Strongsville Recreation Center. For more information or to get registered, please visit www.headstartbasketball.com.
Thanks for listening to the Hoop Heads podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.